And I'm here and Jimmy's here.
Hi, folks. Welcome to the iWrite Radio podcast of Monday, the 6th of July. Videocast as well, of course. Got Jimmy Hutton and Stuart Lockhead with me. I'm Norris Stewart. We're going to have a few words about today's press conference that didn't exactly set the heather alight. We're going to talk about the power grab that's slipping under the radar because of coronavirus. We're going to talk about polls. We'll finish off with polls. Rev Stu has released a few more bits of his polling from the beginning of the month, I think. So the press conference today, Jimmy.
Yeah, it wasn't, like you say, it didn't set the heather alight. Bit of deft footwork to avoid a potential trip up with a Home Office statement, unattributed clearly, which attempted to bolster Jackson Carlow's bullshit position of yesterday on Brewer's programme, and relatively deft footwork on the protest at the border as well. I was kind of surprised that the press didn't go more on that, but I think they realised there's not a lot of mileage in it, judging by the Twitter reaction where only clowns got particularly exercised over it. So, it was all a bit dull, I thought, today, really, mate. What about yourself?
I was impressed with the way she dealt with the Home Office thing. Because what she in effect said, I thought she was a bit long-winded about it, but what she in effect said was, because of data protection, there is a process you have to go through in order to protect people's information. I would have said, terrorist threat. The Home Office has to be ultra careful about who gets this information. Blah, blah, blah. But it was basically, there is a system in place. That system takes a couple of weeks. The system was walked through. We are now in a position to start doing spot checks on people who come to this country. Mm-hmm. You know, it took the wind right out of the sails.
Norrie and the
mad press.
Look, it's like, oh God, I mean, it's a built-up story out of absolutely nothing. I mean, how many people have flown into Scotland in the last 2 weeks on planes? Come on, they're still not flying over my house like normal. And yet hundreds of thousands of people driving into Scotland every week, and they're not being checked. So it's a story out of absolutely nothing.
That is, of course, why you'll never see it as a headline in a unionist paper.
Right, but those people that drive into Scotland aren't possibly coming from countries that have quarantine restrictions.
That's true.
People that fly, the people that fly in, some of them are. I mean, you're right, though. It is. The numbers are pretty small. She also managed to tie it quite neatly to the fact that, yet again, we're seeing single figures of new cases, no deaths for a few days. The reality is, if there was a major issue with people flying into this country and bringing in the virus, we'd be seeing that in the figures. We'd have seen that because they have been flying in small numbers right through the whole thing.
No, my point really was the way she chopped the legs off what could have been a headline story in the press. Sturgeon accuses Home Office of holding Scotland back.
Aye.
You know, and she turned it neatly to a Sturgeon accepts that the Home Office has responsibilities too.
Mm-hmm. Well, considering that the UK government has a track history of losing or sharing data in places that it shouldn't, I'm not surprised the Home Office has tightened things up slightly. It is oddly concerning that it took 4 or 5 weeks to get the whole thing sorted out, particularly given that Serco employees have access to this data, and they've just been employed very, very recently. And we've got public health professionals that don't have access to that data until tomorrow. But why build that up to something that it doesn't need to be?
Let me remind both of you that they're already 3 months late putting in this quarantine regulation. Thousands of people have already arrived in the UK without quarantine, nearly all through Heathrow, and a lot of them found their way into Scotland. This thing's only been running for 3 weeks. It's a pointless exercise.
Can I insist that you're specific about who was 3 months late?
the UK government setting up a quarantine system at all. It should have been in from March.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Be specific.
So why we bothered about 2 weeks, of maybe, especially when the incidence of infection in Scotland is so low? Why is it even a story at all?
It's a story because it's a headline that could attack the SNP.
It's been batted down. It's a story because Jackson Carlow tried to make it a story yesterday because he had nothing much to go with. Sitting in front of his choried paint and try to insist to Gordon Brewer that this was a massive thing.
It's like the story that we never heard, that we never saw anywhere in Scotland, about the Welsh blocking off campsites to English visitors. Never heard of in Scotland. The minute you get half a dozen guys on the border with a placard, one placard as far as I could tell, it becomes an issue. Nobody bothered to go and find out what nationality these guys on the border were.
No, well, they were kind of the usual suspects. I think people as I say, the likes of Jill Martin overreacted. I think Hamza Youssef was remarkably stupid to put the word racism anywhere near that story.
What was that about?
Well, he's turning into a bit of a liability these days, but he's almost unsackable because of his race.
Aye, well, as I say, mate, I think to put that word anywhere near that story was incredibly stupid, and I think he'll pay a hefty price for that because his handling of the hate crimes bill has been not great. He seems to be a bit more polished than substance these days, and you didn't get away in this SNP administration with not being able to back up what you look like.
Well, you know what? It occurred to me watching what I saw of that protest on television down at the border at Lamberton, and I was thinking that could just as easily have been a bunch of people from the Highlands blocking the A9 at Dramochter and shouting at people coming up in their camper vans. No. There's a lot of anger in the Highlands about camper vans.
Aye, but you could actually block the A9. There's no danger they could block the A1. There's no danger they were even trying. They were in the lay-by having a bit of a party. The police went down to speak to them. The police were standing there having a chat with them. There was not an issue. There wasn't a problem until somebody decided to make it a problem.
Exactly. Well, and as I pointed out the other day, there are no plans to put a barrier across the M74 or the A1. I mean, all they've got to do, as we pointed out already, is do what they've done in Australia, fine people, say £4,000 for breaking quarantine. If there was a quarantine rule, you don't need to police it at the border. You just, people pop up all over the place, and then they wouldn't come if they were going to be fined £4,000.
Aye.
Can I?
Sorry, Nora, I was just going to say her line was beautiful on that as well. Quarantine, any decisions on quarantine will be public health decisions. It makes it clear that there is no policy, and if there ever is one, it will be totally driven by health concerns.
Well, talk about well, just before you go, I'll finish with.
I'll just shut up and let you guys get on.
No. They've announced today that the internal border between the state of New South Wales and the state of Victoria, which possibly must be similar to the border between Scotland and England. It's inside a nation state. It is actually closed at the moment, but they'll be used. They, as far as I know, are using hefty fines to police it.
We sort of just throw this in here thing. The Westminster government is going to start, as we discussed, I think yesterday, daily press conferences for the lobby journalists. Should the Scottish government do the same thing?
I don't see any reason why not. I believe the Westminster thing's not due to start till about October, but I think I don't have an issue with the Scottish administration doing exactly the same thing if they want to do so. I think it's been quite popular.
It seems to have worked well as a platform. A way to cut out the middleman was the way I heard the Westminster idea being described by somebody, I think it was in the Telegraph or the Times probably, which seems like quite a smart move when your press is all against you in Scotland.
Yeah.
And could Jackson Carlow make an argument against it? Of course he could. It doesn't matter what they do at Westminster. But I float that as an idea.
I think something like that probably will happen, mate. But I think, given the surprising reaction of the BBC to Jackson Carlow's utterances on Brewer yesterday, I think we will see the daily update continuing for a while yet.
And I think it's a great idea because it does exactly that. It cuts out the middleman.
And it upsets Tories immensely, which is always a good thing.
Well, you have immediate video proof of what was said, not twisted quotes. A particular bugbear of mine, because I think, let it slip under the radar next, the Westminster power grab. Now, Ruth Wishart's written about it. Byline Times has a piece about it. The Lords have objected to what Gove is suggesting, which is all to do with the UK internal market. Now, what Gove wants is all the information the Scottish Government hold on our farmers, etc., being sent to London, and London getting to make the decision on where the money that basically used to come from the EU, these decisions used to be made, subsidies for our farmers in the EU.
No, you're not rubbing two slightly different issues together. One of them's about agriculture, and the other one's about the levelling up of this UK market.
No, I'm explaining to the listeners how this is going to work. It's going to work by power that used to reside at Holyrood. And we're not just talking about the power that they seceded to the EU. We're talking about all the power moving from Holyrood to Westminster. And if you remember, when the Henry VIII powers were first muted, we were told that Westminster only needed this during the period of negotiations with the EU, and it would all be handed back to Holyrood. It's obviously, and as was made, the point was made several times by several different people, you'll never see these powers come back. If anything, you will lose more powers. The excuse is the UK internal market. The fact is they don't want the Scottish Government interfering in trade deals, especially with America.
Well, you've got to start from the high point, which the high point is this, that could still be tested in court, which is that the way that the Scotland Act was built was Scotland had powers over everything apart from named reserve powers. Foreign affairs, defence, and what was the third one? Anyway, they are limited powers. Yes?
Constitution.
The Constitution. So, and where the Westminster Parliament legislate on any issue that affects Scotland, the Scottish Parliament has to rubber stamp it. So that area is still largely unchallenged.
Okay. I have to be blunt here, Stuart. You're talking absolute twaddle. The Sole Convention has been thrown out by the courts, so Scottish agreement is not required on anything. The courts have also said that the Supreme Parliament is the Westminster Parliament and it can override anything Scotland decides. This has already gone through the courts and we've lost the argument. So effectively, the Westminster Parliament can do what it likes to Holyrood.
But you didn't need to sum up the minor details. The Westminster Parliament has always been able to do what it likes because of the lack of a written constitution.
Well, the fact of the matter is the Sole Convention is not worth the paper it's written on.
It never was.
Which is what you were referring to. The
Not
fact
really.
that they gave it nod, it's crap. It's just nonsense.
Well, what we're talking about on the one hand is £500 million a year, which used to come from the EU and get disbursed by the Scottish government to Scottish farmers. Now that money is going to come direct from London, and Michael Gove wants Union Jacks all over that money and to make the decisions about where it goes. That's one aspect of it. On the other hand, there is this internal market plan, which will demand that, and the worst thing about it is they're planning to set up an unelected body to oversee any legislation of the devolved administrations bring up so that they can approve that legislation, which obviously they won't if it takes any power away from Westminster.
Well, in effect, any legislation in Scotland, let's talk about Scotland, keep it simple, that undermines any decisions made at Westminster will simply not be approved by an unelected body. I wonder who's going to get to put the people into that unelected body to make those decisions.
Well, it brings it back to Michael Gove, who's driving this through and who's possibly the gang of three. Might do, you know, Cummings, Gove, and Johnson, but who's the clever one?
None of them.
Well, to quote Ruth Wishart in The National, who's the sleek-it one?
Ah, well, that's Gove. He's the sleek-it one.
Because as with every other promise ever made to Scotland, they're already going back on it. I'll quote the Byline Times to you. I'll put this up as a screen share, really for the quote from the Lords Committee that have been looking at this, because they're pretty damning. The report says, Clause 40 of the bill authorises the Secretary of State to make regulations for the purpose of securing compliance by the United Kingdom with the agreement on agriculture. This is specifically about agriculture. This includes power to set limits on domestic support for the industry across different countries of the UK. We recommend that the power in Clause 40 should require the Secretary of State to consult the relevant devolved administrations prior to regulations being made. The Lords also condemned as an invasive power the regulations demanding Scotland hand over information. It warns generally that these points illustrate the sort of competence disputes that are increasingly likely to arise, especially in relation to future international trade agreements, as the repatriation of powers from the EU gives rise to new areas in which the UK and devolved competencies are liable to intersect.
Yeah, I think the invasive powers is the kind of the headline phrase, isn't it? And handing back information, unnecessary information from farmers to London.
Well, the thing about the information is it allows them then to make comparisons and decisions instead of just in England, all over the UK.
It allows them to shut down Scottish and Welsh farming, which is what this whole thing's all about. You think for a second that we're going to get anything like the level of support that England gets? Not a chance. England elects the UK government, so they will make sure that the money is spent in constituencies that matter to them. They don't care how Scotland and Wales vote.
The money will go to constituencies that vote Tory.
And on top of that, it'll go to large agri-businesses, most of which are in England. There are parts of Scotland on the east coast which have fairly large farms, but most of Scotland, of course, is hill. It's just hill farming with sheep. In fact, they managed to get a quote from the Scottish Sheep Association on this article. I'm not going to bother quoting it. They're obviously not happy.
Well, another wee prediction. Due to the high tariffs we're going to have for lamb with the EU, we're about to see our whole sheep industry destroyed. There you go.
Right. Yep. New Zealand lamb will be cheaper.
Everybody's lamb will be cheaper. The other interesting point that I hadn't realized was this year was the year that Scottish farming was going to get a big boost in the subsidy from the EU. Mm-hmm. That won't happen now. Westminster will simply ignore. I would suggest they'll ignore Scottish farmers because there's no votes in it for them. And we're going to end up with, God knows, grouse shooting on all our hills, nay sheep.
No, because grouse shooting should be one of the first things that we attack in this country and get rid of. It's a Victorian pastime that's turned into a way of life for some rural communities, and that way of life gets to stomp across the rewilding of the Highlands and the putting more people to live there. I mean, nobody needs to have thousands upon thousands of acres of the Scottish Highlands, so some fanny for England can come up here and shoot wild birds. In fact, they're not even wild. They're bloody
Germany, France, and Italy as well.
Yeah. But so the £500 million agricultural subsidy issue is one thing, but it's the market levelling that's really dangerous to the powers of the Scottish Parliament, because they're going to demand regulations are the same. So, for example, things that wouldn't have happened in the last few years, we wouldn't have been ahead of the curve on the no smoking. We wouldn't have had a limit on the price of alcohol. There are quite a few other things that just wouldn't have happened if this proposed new law comes into being.
Well, the real reason for the law,
Holyrood.
the real reason for the law is straightforward. It's so we cannot maintain higher standards.
So we can't have a different standard.
They need Scotland's standards to be low enough for American agriculture to sell into Scotland.
Well, exactly. The famous chlorinated chicken is one of those things.
Yeah.
As it stands, until they change this law, they might bring in this new market levelling, UK market levelling legislation. Scotland could refuse to have chlorinated chicken. Once this is done, that's just an example that we can't do anything about.
We shouldn't be talking about once they bring this is in. They've got an 80-seat majority. This is going to be the law.
Well, that's fair. Yes, that's fair enough.
Sorry, Jimmy, I interrupted you there.
No, you're all right, mate. I mean, it's basically they're just defenestrating Holyrood.
Yeah.
They're pissed off that Holyrood runs a better, whatever they want to call it. We call it a country. They call us a region or a district or whatever. But whatever they want to call it, Holyrood does a far better job of running it than Westminster's ever done. Well, they're pissed off about that because they're looking bad.
Well, but I think it's worthwhile raising the question. Have we not noticed, talking that this is the issues about power grab, right? Now, last week, the Prime Minister deliberately called the Scottish Government an administration. Deliberately, I mean, we've had so much, it's not mistakes. They're having a go. They're goading goading Scotland with the put downs and all the rest of it. I mean, they must.
As a nation, we've got an option to bloody change that. We've got an option to take their goad and ram it back down their throats.
Yeah, but I think they've got a plan. I don't think it's accidental. They're not. The Prime Minister didn't stand there in the Commons and talk about the Scottish administration and continue. I forget the second part of his put down.
Well, I actually think they're standing us up to give us a scalp. I actually think what they're doing is, and agreeing with you, Stuart, that they are goading us to the point where something has to be said, and it gives them an opportunity to give Holyrood a kicking. Not the SNP. I think they understand something that maybe our unionist press don't understand, that in order to castrate the SNP, they need to castrate Holyrood.
No, that's fair.
That's why the powers are going to disappear. And any powers they've got will not come back. But we knew that right at the start. We knew it wasn't coming back.
That's why Plan B or Plan C or Plan D needs to be no something that we didn't even talk about, but it needs to be something that we're ready to put in place and actually do something about.
Well, I think this is probably the single most important area, and we will not see it on the front page of the Scotsman or the Herald or the P&J.
I can tell you something I noticed this morning. Our friend Duncan Hothersill, Labour Haim, who's editor, he was pushing an argument that their main opposition to the next push for independence is that they're going to go back to the economy. The economy is stupid. He was claiming that's where their strong suit is.
Labour haven't got a strong suit at all, anywhere.
I would caution Duncan about that, because I don't think the economy, I mean, people's memories will last long enough to pre-Brexit. And when we look at what's happening to the economy come next year, there's going to be a lot of job losses. Okay, coronavirus, they're going to try and push the blame onto coronavirus. But a lot of it is Brexit. And the companies that are leaving are companies that are thinking, wait a minute, coronavirus is just one of the 29,000 nails in the coffin of Brexit.
Right. It might be a big one, but Brexit, no, and for Labour to push the economy is a bit laughable, given Labour's record the last time they were in power economically wasn't good. What are they
Well,
accusing the SNP of? Running a worse economy than them, because that'd be a hard stretch.
Well, Labour haven't, if you look at it historically, Labour's generally done better in with the economy than the Tories. That is not the accepted argument. But if you look at the numbers, if I'd been for 2008, we'd have been quite pretty, thank you. The problem was the Americans decided to game the system.
You say that, mate, but Labour had plenty of warnings and plenty of opportunity to regulate the city and chose not to. You know, they can't just blame the world economic market, because Gordon Brown was Chancellor for what, 8 years before he took over as Prime Minister, and he never regulated the city at all.
Yeah, but you can't regulate multinationals. They'll just do it somewhere else, and your branch of their particular business will still take a hit in your country.
Aye, true. But the Labour spent hugely. They spent massively, and the spending was needed from 1997. But from about 2005, they ramped up their spending yet again, when they could have been putting money in the bank. I know it's not as simple as that, but they could have been being a bit more careful, and they could have been taking a look at the City of London going, you know what, this unfettered rise never lasts.
Yeah, but until 2007-8, it looked like it was succeeding. You know, I mean,
no, because Gordon Brown believed his own bloody proclamation that he had ended boom and bust.
Well,
He never managed it before, so why would you expect that the son of the man's had suddenly changed the entire world economy by being Chancellor for 8 years?
He was all right. He still had pensions to steal.
Gold to sell.
Gold to sell. You beat me to it, Jimmy.
Okay, guys. Let's move on to polls.
Oh, wow.
As in numbers, not nationalities. We've had the panel-based poll for the Times, which gave us a 54% number for independence. Reverend Stu is doing his usual thing where he's drip feeding us various questions from the poll he ran from the beginning of the month. He's written a piece today about the possibility of a second independence party gaining as many as 28 seats at Holyrood. Jimmy, I know you want to tear this to shreds, so go ahead.
I didn't really want to tear it to shreds, mate. I've no idea why you put what I consider to be a fake poll. I've no idea why he's putting out a poll saying that Alex Salmond's going to join one of these Diddy parties and suddenly turn a Diddy party into a political behemoth that's going to finish second in the Scottish elections. That's not going to happen. So his numbers and the premise that he comes out with off the back of his numbers, that we could have 28 seats, I think it's a crock of shit, mate. Alex Salmond is not going to join one of the Diddy parties. He's just not. The man was First Minister of Scotland. Do you really think he's going to want to hook up with Stu Campbell or one of the Diddy parties that's floating about the now, who seem to be, they're drowning in a morass, the gender rights argument and the hate crimes bill argument, and Christ, one of them that's there's basically just a tribute act to Tommy Sheridan, for crying out loud. You know what I mean?
Hope not hate.
Salmond's not going to join any of these organisations.
I don't think that's the point. I think you're fair. Fair enough, Jimmy. Quite unique to make those points. But like what they call the granularity, the fact that he asks some very odd, some serious questions is worthwhile. And some of the stuff that came out, that at one point it shows that actually even Conservative Party members were 50-50 likely to vote for a Salmond party. How?
It's interesting. And as I say, my hope is, as I said earlier before we came on air, my hope is that it's just leverage.
Well, let's not just forget, that's not just, I mean, this was an outlier, and obviously got a few people excited, but don't forget, the Professor of Polls was also writing today, Professor John Curtis, commenting on yesterday's Sunday Times poll. And I've never known him to give so much, the word is not support, he's recognised how solid the current voting for independence is. So that was quite interesting.
But Stuart, we've said that since we started doing these things, and you guys would have been saying it long before I got involved. The 45% never went away. The 45% in every election since the SNP have held that 45%. You know, their worst election result probably 2016. They were 46.5% of the vote. In 2011, in 2015 was it? What happened in 2015?
Oh, they won an election and they went all those MPs to.
It was a Westminster election. Aye. They got 50% of the vote that year. All the 45 is there, and it's rock solid. What we're looking at when we're looking at 54%, as I said yesterday, 54% off about 63 that's available to us, because there is about 37% that is just arch unionist that will never change.
I don't agree with that, but I'll let you off with it.
Well, I mean, come on, even Labour are even managing to get 15% when they've got Richard Leonard, who we're all agreed is possibly the worst leader that the Scottish Labour have ever seen, and they're still sitting on 15% of the vote. I noticed this morning that people are suggesting that Richard Leonard's job coats on a shugly peg. I'd love to see who they think they're going to replace him with.
I think Richard Leonard's playing a blinder because he's saying nothing.
Well, that's probably when he's at his best, mate.
At his best. Look, what they are saying at the moment, and it's probably not no great argument against it. The difference at the moment is the First Minister's handling of the emergency, the coronavirus, the pandemic. This is the explanation they're giving for this. There's a 2 or 3% possibly extra support for independence in the poll at the moment that could be down to that competency factor.
I think they're ignoring Brexit at their peril. I think people are beginning to realise that no deal is more and more likely, and that's been reflected. I agree coronavirus is part of it, but I think it might be as much as a 50-50 split.
I think you're wrong there on. I don't think MD's really thinking about Brexit. Apart from
no, they are. Any polling you see on Brexit now, and people are still doing polling, and UK wide, you're looking at about 65-35 against Brexit right now, because it's looking like it's going to be a disaster. All the things that they promised their own voters to get through, they promised wouldn't happen, are going to happen. It looks very much like a no deal. It looks very much like that cliff edge, and it looks very much like, as the world goes into a massive recession, we're going to take a henner and do the biggest dive into that recession of any country on the planet, because we're ripping ourselves away from Europe. I mean, how can the Tories argue broad shoulders for Scotland when we're turning our back on the broad shoulders of Europe? How much was that EU package the other week that they agreed?
500 billion.
Billions of pounds. Aye. Hundreds of billions that they're chucking in. And we're turning our back on that and saying, no, we can do it all ourselves. And by the way, we're going to do it by trading with India, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. We didn't need to trade with those countries closest to us. We can do it all on our own, because we are the exception to every rule on the planet, because we are Britain.
Well,
even
Australia depends.
Realise what a load of shit that is.
Australia depends on its deal with China. Canada depends on its deal with the US of A. What's left? India. Well, it's still not achieved its potential on the middle class.
No, India's still it's a powerful economy, mate, but it's not a powerful country. It's not a powerful nation. They still have very, very many social problems to be sorted out before you start to rely on them as an economic partner for the next century.
Anything else to say on the polling? Not really.
Tomorrow.
I'd be interested to know how very few of these polls are asking questions. You know, the panel-based one, basically, I mean, they included UKIP. They included the Brexit Party, although they both polled at 0%.
Yeah.
But they never asked a question about another independence party. I'd be interested to know why.
I think another independence party is in a bit of a bubble at the moment.
I think that's just a social media bubble.
I do think at some point, Jackson, I didn't steal the paintings. Carlo will grab it as a bat for the SNP by saying your supporters are all so unhappy with you, they're talking about starting a new party.
That's one of the biggest dangers.
Well,
now, wait a minute. That was one thing out of the Rev Stu poll. It appeared to say that the Joe public weren't that fussed about what happened with Salmond, and so the SNP could still survive.
Stuart,
sorry, I have no idea where that came from, Stuart.
Stuart, if there are other independence candidates put up against SNP candidates, and I know they say they're going to be list only, but they're still going to be standing against SNP candidates. They're going to be sat in hustings, and they will be asked questions on SNP policy that they can't answer, because all of them are saying, we're going to vote with the SNP. We're just there as a
I mean, I generally speaking, I agree with you that I don't think that. I mean, I don't think that it's actually going to work. But some of the granular stuff was quite surprising. How few people seem to be put off the SNP or put off Alex Salmond, in spite of what has been going on about the so-called scandal.
Well, I'm interested to know why, as I say, why Stu put that in the field there, because he did put out a trail of breadcrumbs for people to go and find last week about the Alex Salmond story. I'm glad that nobody's bothered to mention it, but he's desperately trying to get some names out there without getting his cell into bother for putting some names out there. So I worry that he could actually be more of a threat to the SNP by blowing this whole Salmond thing up. And I'm interested to know why he chooses to do that at this point when they've got 55% in the constituency poll and 50% in the list poll.
I think he just thinks that I think he believes there's a conspiracy at the top of the SNP that needs to be sorted. I think he thinks it's going to be a drag on their electoral success. Where he gets the proof of that, I don't know.
It's only going to be a drag, Norrie, if he makes it a drag. As I say, 55%. Yeah. I mean, that poll yesterday, it's only a poll and it's 10 months to the election, but that poll yesterday gives the SNP a massive majority. If they poll 55% in the constituency vote and 50% in the list vote, it doesn't matter about diddy parties. It doesn't matter about wee Paddy Harvey and what he wants. They have their own backing to do whatever they want and however they want to take that fight. And frankly, I still trust them to take that fight over Stu Campbell or any other of the Pat Lee or anybody else out there. I still trust them to do better at it.
I'll sit on the fence until I see manifestos and who the individuals involved are. Any funnies to finish?
It's been a singularly unfunny weekend, really, hasn't it?
Well, I've got one.
Oh, goody.
Basically, this is a piss take of Nigel Farage, as he chose to go to the pub when he.
Yeah, I'm afraid we don't serve alcohol to under 16s, unfortunately. This is the Prince of Wales, not the Prince Andrew. Okay, bye-bye. You shouldn't be here.
Why shouldn't I?
Well, firstly, we don't serve racists before 12, and secondly, you've just come back from America, so you should be in quarantine.
No, I live a very healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm sorry, Joe Wicks, but I don't know if hating foreigners burns that many calories. How are you feeling?
Misogynistic, anti-women.
Yeah, I meant symptom-wise, not in general.
It's irrelevant.
It's not irrelevant, you toad. Do you know how corona spreads?
Penguins.
It spreads because some people are too stupid to isolate, and guess who those people are?
Romanian families.
No, try again.
People from India or Australia.
You don't get where I'm coming from.
Bongo, bongo, lamb. It's not racist, obviously.
Yeah, okay, so you guys didn't order that cocktail earlier just so you could say Negroni.
Well, of course we did.
Nigel, get out of the pub. Yeah, I'll even play you out with a song.
This is ludicrous.
It's Jojo. Now please leave.
Very good. Very, very good.
That was well put together. Okay, guys, thank you for joining me again. Jimmy Hutton, Stuart Lockhead, I'm Norrie Stewart. And thanks for listening and watching, folks. And we'll catch up with you tomorrow, where no doubt Boris Johnson will have resigned and Dominic Cummings will have turned into a big pie. See you tomorrow, folks.